In such a challenging time that we live in, may those words be true. Let us pray. God of grace, God of hope, God of peace, God who overcomes all obstacles, overcomes our fears, who shows us the way forward, speak a word of peace, a word of hope. Help us to dream a new dream, the dream that you placed in Martin's heart. May it continue to make a root and be rooted in our hearts as well. Amen. One of Dr. King's favorite passages was this passage in Amos. It's a passage that he referred to time and time again during the most challenging times in his life. It's the story of Amos, a prophet, a truth teller, who lived about 7 centuries before the time of Jesus. And he was called to speak a word of challenge to his own people, the people of Israel. Amos was a farmer. He herded the sheep and he raised nuts from the local orchard. He was an ordinary person, and it's a reminder that God chooses ordinary people like Amos and ordinary people like you and me to speak truth to power. It was a time of King Uzziah, a mighty king who had helped expand the temple. It was a time when the people of Israel were at relative peace and relative prosperity. And God was calling Amos to go and speak a word of challenge to his own king, this humble shepherd and farmer, and to speak a word of truth to the leaders of the temple. And these are the words that Amos spoke on behalf of God. I hate, I despise your festivals, and I take no delight in your solemn assemblies. Imagine yourself, this farmer, this seemingly uneducated person from a backwoods town, going and speaking a word to the king and to the head of the temple. I despise your festivals, and I take no delight in your solemn assemblies. It was a time of prosperity, and Amos saw what God saw, that the wealthy were hoarding the wealth, that they were focusing on religious festivals, while the poorest of the poor at the very doorstep of the temple, when unministered to, remained helpless. Amos understood what many of us know who have grown up in the churches, that it's easy for churches to lose their way. Right? It's easy for us to take detours. I'm a cradle Baptist. I've been part of the church my entire life, and I've seen times when the church has gotten it right and times when we have gone on a detour, an off-road journey. I remember a church I was called to a previous congregation as a settled pastor, and I went to the first 3 meetings of the deacons. And the heated topic that captured the entire agenda for all 3 meetings was whether to go from glass communion cups to disposable communion cups. Imagine letting go of the glass. We've always been used to those little glass cups, haven't we? And now some outlier, some renegade was suggesting that we get rid of the glass and we have disposable cups. 3 meetings, heated debate. It's easy for us to lose our way, isn't it? In churches, as individuals, it's easy to focus on what doesn't matter so that we can avoid what really matters. Of course, the work of our church is often on our very doorstep. This is outside the White Whale. This is a photo of the homes of one of our neighbors. here in Beverly. I'm going to change the person's name, and I'll call this person Jared. It's not his real name. But I've gotten to know Jared's story. He deals with a lot of struggles in his life, and all of his earthly possessions are in that cart. Perhaps you've seen this cart up and down Cabot Street. He sleeps at night, sometimes under a bridge. He sleeps some night in an alleyway of one of our businesses. He sleeps some nights in the graveyard in back of our church. Sometimes churches, and sometimes we as people of faith, get caught up in what doesn't really matter. And we miss the face of our neighbor who is in need, literally, on our doorstep. Our call is clear. The heart of God is for those who are forgotten. The heart of God, says the prophets, is for the poor, the most vulnerable, those of us who are dealing with addiction, or perhaps a mental illness, or perhaps have just fallen on hard times economically so that all of our possessions can be put into a simple shopping cart. Amos said these words of challenge to the king and to his fellow parishioners in the temple. And then he offered this vision of hope, this vision of what our world can be. This phrase that was the favorite phrase of Dr. King, but let justice roll down like the waters, and righteousness like an ever-flowing stream. Dr. King's vision of compassion and advocacy for those on the margins, people of all races and all backgrounds, was rooted in the teachings of Jesus. And Jesus was rooted in the teachings of the prophets like Jeremiah and Isaiah, Micah, and Amos. It led Jesus, it led Amos, it led Dr. King to a life, a ministry of compassion. The word compassion is different than the word sympathy. When we are sympathetic, we will say a kind word to somebody, we will send them a card. And sympathy is a good thing. It's good for us to be sympathetic. But compassion is when another feels your pain. Another comes and weeps with you. Another comes and sits with you when you are so overwhelmed by life that there are no words to be spoken, and your friend or your family member, or sometimes even a stranger who sees your need, all they do is offer their presence. Have you ever had someone feel your pain? During a time of struggle in your life, someone came along who you just knew had your back, felt your pain, and you knew that you were not alone. Remember what that felt like? Such a gift. And perhaps there have been times when you have offered that gift of compassion to another. That was the life of Jesus. Fueled by the words and the passion that God had placed in the life of a humble prophet named Amos. It so fueled Jesus' life that he could not separate himself from the other. It so fueled Dr. King's life that he could not separate himself from the needs of others. Jesus speaks of this essence of compassion in Matthew's gospel. Whatever you do unto these, the least of my sisters and brothers, you do unto me. Jesus was so immersed in the words of God, the heart of God, that there was no them and us. It wasn't the homeless. It's our homeless neighbors. Jesus understood the needs of those around us. Whatever you do unto these, the least of my sisters and brothers, you do unto me. Imagine. So identifying with the human condition in our brokenness that when we offer kindness or when we walk across the street to avoid someone who makes us comfortable, to avoid someone who creates some disease within us, it's as if we are walking across the street to avoid Jesus. And when we get to know the name of our neighbor who is living out of his shopping cart on Cabot Street, when we know Jared's name, it's as if we are speaking to Jesus. Do we believe that to be true? Have there been times in your life when you feel like the world is collapsing around your ears? You ever felt like you didn't or you don't fit in? Have you ever felt like you don't know where to turn, or you wake up at 3 a.m, yet again working those worry beads, or you feel your heart is breaking because of a great loss, or someone has broken a trust, and you feel like your life has ended? Jesus is saying in Matthew's gospel, that's when I'm with you. That's when I am embracing you. That's when your pain is my pain. Whatever you do unto these, the least of my sisters and brothers, my family, says Jesus, you're doing it to me. So that when we get to know the Jareds of our community, when we get to know their name and share our name with them and treat them not like them, but as our sisters and brothers, when we take the time to advocate for those who are being bullied or pushed aside, we're on the cusp of a new presidency, and there's a lot of uncertainty for refugees and immigrants. Is it about those refugees and those immigrants? Or is it about our sisters and our brothers? And what will we do? What stand will we take, Dr. King asks, for those who are most vulnerable? For in the world of Jesus, there's no them, there's just us. There's no outsiders, there's just us. Because they are my family. This message got Jesus killed. This message got Dr. King killed because it challenges the eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth mentality of our greater culture. But the dream of Dr. King lives on because it is rooted in an ancient dream, gifted to Amos, gifted to Jesus, and 2,000 years later, gifted to you and me. We are the carriers of this legacy. We are the ones we've been waiting for. The dream lives on in us because the dream comes from the heart of God, who brought the heavens and the earth into being. Dr. King says the arc of justice is very long, but it bends towards justice. The arc of history is long, but it bends towards justice. We are the ones we've been waiting for. We at First Baptist have a ministry. We are the largest non-governmental provider of affordable housing in the North Shore. This humble little church, 430 some housing units. 26 of our neighbors who are currently living on the streets. About a year from now, give or take a few months, will be living in a new place called Boston Crossing, which is in Salem, for people who are currently on the streets, apartments with kitchens, and with a live-in social worker to provide the wraparound services for people who are moving away from addiction or having trouble staying on their meds. 26 people will no longer be on the streets. The dream of Amos and Jesus and Dr. King continues. A group of our church went down to North Carolina to repair homes last summer. 10 of us will be going to Nicaragua in about 5 weeks' time to install water filters, and many of you are helping to support that team. We provide 3 meals a week for neighbors who have difficulty making ends meet and otherwise wouldn't have a meal that day. We're the dream. We are the dream keepers. God's using ordinary folk like us, imperfect vessels like us, to bring hope and healing and blessing. We shall overcome. We are not afraid today. The Spirit of God is alive and well. That is the good news. I hope you can join us Monday evening to hear stories of hope, people who have moved from the streets to a home because we have a heart for each other. This is the good news. Thanks be to God. And may God's people say, amen.